Northern Minnesota Territory, October 12, 1883. Anna Bergstrom, a 42-year-old Norwegian widow with 3 children under 10, started building a second wall around her log cabin. Not repairs, not improvements. A complete second wall, 18 inches outside the first, running the entire perimeter of her home. Her neighbors, experienced frontiersmen who'd survived a dozen brutal Minnesota winters, watched this display with a mixture of pity and disbelief. Samuel Hendricks, the settlement's most respected builder, who'd constructed 17 cabins in the territory, stood outside the trading post shaking his head. "That woman's wasting good lumber on a fool's errand," he told anyone who'd listen. "Double walls? She's building a barn around a house. Might as well burn half that wood now and save herself the labor." Thomas McCarty, a Scottish stonemason who'd worked construction in Edinburgh before homesteading, was even more direct. "The lass has lost her senses with grief," he said, watching Anna hoist logs into place with a rope and pulley system. "Eric's been gone 4 months, and now she's building walls around walls. It's madness dressed up as carpentry." Martha Sullivan, who'd raised 6 children through Minnesota winters and considered herself the settlement's authority on survival, visited Anna's claim with what she called Christian concern. She found Anna marking measurements with charcoal on logs, her children playing nearby. "Anna, dear, you're exhausting yourself for nothing," Martha said, her voice dripping with the condescension reserved for widows making poor decisions. "That inner wall already keeps the wind out. Another wall just means twice the chinking, twice the maintenance, twice the wood rot. You're making work where none exists." But Anna Bergstrom kept working. Every dawn she was outside with her Swedish felling axe, her Norwegian adze, and her late husband's tools, building something the settlement had never seen. What did this Norwegian widow understand about thermal physics that Minnesota's most experienced builders had completely missed? Before we reveal the scientific principle that would save Anna's children from the deadliest winter in territorial history, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your engagement helps preserve these forgotten stories of frontier innovation. Anna's construction method baffled everyone who examined it. The inner wall, her original cabin, was solid Norway pine logs, 8 inches in diameter, chinked tight with moss and clay, exactly as Eric had built it 3 years earlier. Standard frontier construction, proven, reliable. Then, 18 inches outward from that wall, Anna erected a complete second wall of 6-inch pine logs. Not a facade, not a windbreak. A full structural wall with its own foundation stones, its own corner joints, its own chinking. The gap between the 2 walls remained empty. No insulation, no fill, just 18 inches of dead air space running floor to ceiling, wall to wall, around the entire cabin. "She's built an 18-inch coffin for her family," Hendricks told the men at the lumber camp. "That gap's going to trap moisture, rot both walls from the inside out. By spring thaw, she'll have 16 inches of ice between those walls and structural failure by summer. I've seen it happen with double-layer roofing. Same principle, same disaster." McCarty's objection was more technical. "The heat from her stove will hit that inner wall, conduct right through the wood, pine's a terrible insulator, cross that air gap, and escape through the outer wall just as fast as if she had one wall. She's doubled her surface area for heat loss. Basic thermodynamics. The woman's made her cabin colder, not warmer, and used twice the timber to do it." Even Anna's few supporters questioned the mathematics of her project. John Bergman, a fellow Norwegian immigrant who'd helped Eric clear the land, visited with genuine concern. "Anna, I count your lumber usage. You've used 400 linear feet of logs for that outer wall. That's enough firewood to heat your cabin for 2 months. You're trading winter fuel for a construction project that won't work." The settlement's criticism intensified when Anna began her roofing work. She didn't just extend the outer wall upward. She built a completely separate roof structure over the outer wall, leaving an 18-inch air gap between her original roof and the new outer roof. Now she's trapped heat at the ceiling with nowhere to go. Martha Sullivan announced with the authority of someone who'd never studied physics. Heat rises. Everyone knows that. She's built herself a steam trap. Come January, that cabin will be so hot and humid they'll suffocate, and the condensation will rot every timber she owns. The trading post became headquarters for the running commentary on Anna's folly. Men would stop by after visiting her claim, each with a new observation about why her design violated common sense. "The door's got 2 doors now, 18 inches apart," reported Henry Walsh, who'd delivered supplies. "You gotta open one, step into this little closet space, close the first door, then open the second door. It's like entering a bank vault to reach your kitchen. What's the point?" "The windows are tunnels," added another visitor. 18-inch deep window wells. Her kids can barely see outside. It's like living in a fort. But Anna kept working. When critics stopped by with unsolicited advice, she listened politely, thanked them for their concern, and returned to her ads. When Martha Sullivan organized a collection of practical supplies for the widow, normal supplies, implying Anna should abandon her project, Anna accepted graciously and used the extra nails for her outer wall construction. By late November, with first snow already fallen, Anna had completed her double-wall fortress. The structure looked bizarre, a cabin wrapped in another cabin, with mysterious gaps everywhere. The settlement had a new source of entertainment for the long winter ahead, watching Anna Bergstrom's expensive mistake. What Anna understood, and what her critics had never considered despite decades of frontier experience, was the physics of thermal mass, radiant heat barriers, and dead air spaces. The principle Anna employed wasn't new. It was ancient, forgotten, and completely absent from American frontier building traditions, but it had kept humans alive in extreme climates for thousands of years. Korean Ondol heating systems used similar principles as early as 5000 BCE, capturing heat in stone and clay, creating air gaps that prevented heat escape, building thermal barriers between living spaces and the killing cold outside. Plains Indian winter lodges used double-layer construction with air gaps between buffalo hide layers, creating dead air insulation that could maintain 70-degree interiors when external temperatures hit 20 below zero. Norwegian Stabur storage buildings, the structures Anna had grown up around, used air gap construction to maintain stable temperatures year-round. Anna's late husband, Eric, had been a skipsbygger in Norway, a ship carpenter who understood that a ship's hull wasn't just wood. It was a thermal management system. Double planking with air gaps kept cargo holds stable, prevented ice formation, managed condensation. Eric had explained these principles to Anna during their Atlantic crossing, pointing out how the ship's construction maintained temperature. Before he died of pneumonia in June 1883, Eric had sketched designs for a double-wall cabin, explaining the physics to Anna during his final lucid days. "The gap is the secret," he'd whispered, his voice weak but certain. "Air doesn't move. Heat can't conduct. The walls don't touch, so heat can't travel. It's not the wood that insulates. It's the space between." Anna had listened, understood, and after burying her husband, began acquiring lumber. Here's what her critics fundamentally misunderstood. Heat transfers through 3 mechanisms: conduction, convection, and radiation. A single-wall log cabin loses heat through all 3 simultaneously. Conduction. Heat moves through the wood itself, from warm interior to cold exterior. Pine wood has a thermal conductivity of about 0.12 watts per meter, Kelvin. Not terrible, but not good. An 8-inch pine log provides some insulation, but heat still conducts through. Convection. Air movement inside the cabin carries heat to the walls, which absorb it and transfer it outside. Wind outside the cabin creates convection currents that pull heat away from the external wall surface. Radiation. The hot stove radiates heat in all directions. That radiant energy hits the walls, gets absorbed, and eventually re-radiates into the outside air. In a standard single-wall cabin, you're losing heat through all 3 mechanisms constantly. You burn massive amounts of wood just to maintain a marginal temperature. The typical Minnesota frontier cabin in winter, with a fire burning continuously, maintained internal temperatures between 42 and 58 degrees Fahrenheit when external temperatures hit zero. Survivable? Barely, but brutal. Anna's double wall design attacked all three heat loss mechanisms simultaneously. The 18-inch air gap, completely sealed, no air circulation, eliminated convection between walls. Air can't convect if it can't move. That trapped air became what engineers now call dead airspace, one of nature's finest insulators. The thermal conductivity of still air is 0.024 watts per meter Kelvin, 5 times better than wood. But Anna's design did something more sophisticated. The outer wall absorbed radiant heat from the sun during daylight hours, warming slightly. That heat couldn't conduct inward. The air gap prevented it. At night, when temperatures plummeted, the outer wall froze solid, but that cold couldn't conduct inward either. The inner wall remained at whatever temperature the cabin's interior maintained, insulated by 18 inches of absolutely still air. The thermal mass calculation is revealing. Anna's inner wall, 8-inch pine logs, roughly 2,800 linear feet of timber for a 20 by 24-foot cabin, contained approximately 11,200 pounds of wood. Wood's specific heat capacity is about 0. 4 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit. That inner wall could store roughly 4,500 BTUs per degree of temperature change. The outer wall added another 7,800 pounds of wood with similar heat capacity. But the crucial element was the trapped air. The cabin enclosed roughly 970 cubic feet of dead airspace in the gap. That air mass, once heated by radiant energy from the inner wall, maintained temperature with minimal energy input because it had nowhere to escape. Compare this to Samuel Hendrix's cabin, same dimensions, single 8-inch log wall. Hendrix burned roughly 1 cord of wood every 8 days to maintain minimal winter temperatures. That's 45 cords per winter, representing about 810 million BTUs of energy, most of which escaped through his walls via conduction, convection, and radiation. Anna's design promised to reduce heat loss by capturing and holding thermal energy. The inner wall radiated heat inward to the living space and outward toward the air gap. That air gap absorbed the radiant energy, heated slowly, and became itself a thermal barrier. The outer wall saw almost no heat from the interior. The air gap prevented its transfer, so it contributed virtually nothing to heat loss. The gaps at doors and windows, which critics mocked, functioned as thermal airlocks. Opening an exterior door didn't immediately flood the cabin with freezing air. The 18-inch entry space served as a buffer zone, a thermal transition that prevented rapid heat loss. Traditional Norwegian stabber had used this exact design element for centuries. The deep window wells, also mocked, prevented wind from directly striking the interior glass, reducing convection heat loss by an estimated 60% compared to flush-mounted windows. But Anna's critics saw none of this. They saw wasted lumber, eccentric design, a widow's grief-driven delusion. McCarty, the stonemason, calculated that Anna had used 480 linear feet of logs for her outer wall and support structure, representing roughly 6,200 board feet of lumber. That's 3 months of heating fuel she's nailed to the outside of her cabin, he declared at the Trading Post. And for what? To prove a dead Norwegian's fever dream? By December 1st, Anna had burned through approximately 1/8 cord of wood. Her cabin maintained an internal temperature of 62 degrees Fahrenheit, with external temperatures at 18 degrees. Hendrix, by comparison, had burned 3/4 of a cord to maintain 48 degrees internal temperature. Nobody was measuring, nobody was comparing. Anna's cabin looked strange, therefore it must be failing. That assumption would shatter within 3 weeks. December 18th, 1883. The temperature began falling at dawn, dropping from 12 degrees to 0 by noon. By evening, the thermometer outside the Trading Post read 18 below 0. By midnight, 32 below. This wasn't unusual cold. This was killing cold, the kind of Arctic blast that swept down from Canada every few years and tested every structure, every stove, every survival strategy. The blizzard hit at 2 a.m. on December 19th. 40-mile-per-hour winds drove snow horizontally, creating whiteout conditions that lasted 36 hours. Drifts buried first-floor windows. The wind, chill, a concept frontier settlers understood experientially, even without the term, drove the effective temperature below 50 below zero. This was the cold that killed livestock in their barns, froze water buckets solid in minutes, turned inadequately chinked cabins into death traps. Samuel Hendricks woke at 4 a.m. to his children crying. His cabin thermometer read 34 degrees. The stove was blazing. He'd loaded it with wood at midnight, but the heat was vanishing into the walls, the ceiling, the floor, escaping through every molecular pathway available. He added more wood. The interior temperature climbed to 38 degrees and stabilized. His family huddled under every blanket they owned, pressed close to the stove, surviving. Thomas McCarty's stone fireplace, his pride, his proof of old-world superiority, couldn't keep pace with the cold. Stone holds heat beautifully, but it also conducts heat directly into the frozen ground beneath. His cabin reached 40 degrees at the warmest point, 8 feet from the fireplace. In the corners, frost formed on the interior walls. His wife, Catherine, developed a racking cough by the second day. Their youngest, 4-year-old Duncan, shivered uncontrollably despite being wrapped in wool blankets and positioned 18 inches from the fire. Martha Sullivan's cabin, built by her late husband, maintained meticulously, representing 15 years of frontier wisdom, hit 36 degrees. She burned wood faster than her sons could split it, feeding the stove every 45 minutes throughout the night. Her hands cracked from the dry cold. Her breath formed clouds visible in the firelight. She told her family, "This is normal. This is winter. We'll survive." She believed it. The Hendricks family burned through 4 days of wood reserves in 36 hours. The McCarty family burned through 5 days' worth. The Sullivan family burned through 6. Across the settlement, 19 families fought the same battle. Burn wood faster, huddle closer, survive until the blizzard passed. 3 families evacuated to the trading post, which had a larger stove and more bodies to share heat. On the morning of December 20th, with the blizzard still raging, Samuel Hendricks made a decision that likely saved his children's lives. He strapped on his snowshoes, wrapped himself in every layer he owned, and trudged through waist-deep snow to Anna Bergstrom's cabin. He needed to check on the widow. He expected to find tragedy. A frozen family. A failed experiment. Confirmation of every warning he'd issued. He knocked on the outer door of Anna's thermal airlock entrance. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. The outer door opened. A rush of air, not freezing, but merely cool, emerged from the 18-inch entryway space. Anna appeared at the inner door, opening it to reveal the cabin interior. Heat radiated outward, visible as a shimmer in the frigid air. Hendricks stepped into the airlock, closed the outer door, then entered the cabin proper. The temperature inside Anna's cabin was 64 degrees Fahrenheit. 64 degrees. No frost on the interior walls. No desperate huddling near the stove. Anna's 3 children were playing on the floor in regular clothes, not wrapped in blankets, not shivering, not crying from cold. The cabin felt comfortable, almost warm, impossibly stable. Anna's stove, the same size as Hendricks's, burning the same pine wood, was loaded but not blazing. She'd added wood twice since midnight, she explained. Twice. Hendricks had fed his stove 11 times in the same period. How? Hendricks asked, his voice hoarse from cold exposure and disbelief. The walls, Anna said simply. The gap. Eric explained it. The cold can't reach inside because the air in the gap doesn't move. The heat stays trapped. Hendricks spent 10 minutes in Anna's cabin, thawing his hands, observing impossible warmth. He examined the walls, felt the interior surface of the inner logs, warm to the touch, and then pressed his hand against the inner surface of the outer wall through a small inspection gap Anna had left for exactly this purpose. The outer wall was frozen solid. The inner wall was warm. The 18-inch gap between them had created a thermal barrier so effective that it seemed to violate common sense. But it didn't violate physics. It was physics, properly understood and correctly applied. Before we continue with how this knowledge spread through the settlement and saved lives that winter, hit that like button and comment below telling me, what other historical building techniques do you want me to investigate? Your suggestions directly influence what stories I research next. Hendricks returned home through the blizzard, his mind reeling. That evening, as his family shivered at 37 degrees despite a roaring fire, he told them what he'd seen. His wife didn't believe him. His oldest son suggested Mr. Hendricks had suffered cold-induced hallucination. But the numbers didn't lie, and Hendricks was a builder who understood measurements. He began calculating. Anna's cabin, roughly 150 square feet of interior space, maintained at 64 degrees, burning approximately 1/4 cord of wood every 4 days. His cabin, roughly 100 square feet, maintained at 38 degrees, burning 1 cord of wood every 4 days. Anna's cabin was achieving 26 degrees higher interior temperature using 1/4 the fuel. That represented a fuel efficiency improvement of roughly 1,600%. It was impossible, except it was happening. On December 21st, the blizzard finally broke. The temperature remained at 28 below zero, but the wind stopped, visibility returned, and the settlement could assess the damage. 2 families had suffered frostbite. McCarty's youngest, Duncan, had developed pneumonia, the same disease that killed Anna's husband. The Gunderson family, new immigrants who'd arrived in September, had nearly lost their infant daughter to hypothermia before evacuating to the trading post. And Anna Bergstrom's children were healthy, comfortable, and completely unbothered by the worst cold snap in territorial memory. By December 22nd, 7 men had visited Anna's cabin to confirm Hendricks's report. All 7 returned home silent, thoughtful, and embarrassed. Thomas McCarty was the first to break the silence. On December 23rd, he stood in the trading post and addressed the assembled men with the bluntness of someone who'd been catastrophically wrong and had the integrity to admit it. "I was wrong," McCarty said, his Scottish accent thick with exhaustion. He'd been up for 2 nights straight, tending his sick son. "Anna Bergstrom built something I didn't understand, and I mocked her for it. I called her mad. I was the fool, not her." He pulled out a small notebook where he'd sketched Anna's wall design after visiting her cabin. "The airspace works. I don't fully understand why, but it works. My stone fireplace, which I thought was superior because stone holds heat, is actually conducting heat directly into the frozen ground. Her double walls with an air gap prevent that conduction entirely. The heat stays inside because it can't travel through air that isn't moving." Martha Sullivan, to her credit, was equally direct. "I told Anna she was wasting effort," she announced at church service on Christmas Eve. "I told her she was building work where none existed. I was speaking from ignorance, not experience. That woman has created the warmest cabin in Minnesota territory using frontier innovation I'd never considered. We owe her an apology and our attention." The empirical data became impossible to ignore. Anna recorded her fuel consumption meticulously. Eric had taught her to keep ship's logs, and she applied that discipline to her cabin management. From December 18th through January 15th, 28 days of brutal cold, Anna burned a total of 2 1/4 cords of wood. Hendricks, by comparison, burned 11 cords. Sullivan burned 9 cords. McCarty burned 10. Anna's fuel efficiency wasn't just better, it was transformative. But the real validation came from temperature measurements. John Bergman, the Norwegian immigrant who'd questioned Anna's lumber usage, returned after the blizzard with a plan. He'd purchased a mercury thermometer from the trading post, an expensive instrument, $2, but he considered it an investment in truth. He proposed a controlled measurement, place identical thermometers in 3 cabins, his, Hendricks's, and Anna's, all positioned 6 feet from the stove and 4 feet above the floor. Record temperatures every 4 hours for 1 week. Let mathematics settle the argument. Anna agreed immediately. Hendricks agreed. Bergman's cabin would serve as the control. Standard single-wall construction, competent but conventional. The results, recorded from January 16th through January 23rd, 1884, were stunning. External temperatures ranged from 8 below zero to 12 above, averaging about 3 degrees. Anna's cabin maintained an average internal temperature of 63 degrees, with temperature fluctuations of only 4 degrees, from 61 to 65, throughout the day and night cycle. Hendricks's cabin averaged 46 degrees, with fluctuations of 13 degrees, from 39 to 52 degrees. Bergman's cabin averaged 44 degrees, with similar fluctuations. The data proved 3 critical points. First, Anna's design achieved 17-degree higher average temperature than conventional construction. Second, her design provided thermal stability. Temperature fluctuations of only 4 degrees compared to 13 degrees in standard cabins, meaning more consistent comfort and less stress on the structure. Third, her fuel efficiency was approximately 4 times better than conventional construction when normalized for interior temperature. Hendricks, now Anna's most vocal advocate, presented the data at a settlement meeting in late January. "We've been building cabins the same way for generations," he said. "We accepted that winter meant suffering, that staying barely warm meant burning enormous amounts of wood, that cold cabins were the price of frontier life. Anna Bergstrom proved we were wrong. Not with theory, with measurement. Her cabin is warmer, more stable, and uses 1/4 the fuel. Those aren't opinions. Those are facts." The question everyone asked: how? Anna invited the entire settlement to inspect her cabin, explaining Eric's principles in plain language. "Heat moves through wood, but it can't move through air that's standing still," she explained. "The gap between my walls is filled with air that can't circulate. It's trapped. That trapped air is a barrier that heat can't cross. The cold outside can't reach inside, and the heat inside can't escape outside." She showed them the entry airlock. "When you open the outer door, cold air enters this small space. When you close the outer door and open the inner door, only the air in this space enters my cabin, maybe 10 cubic feet of cold air, not 100. It's like a lock on a canal. You control what comes through." She explained the deep window wells. "Wind hitting a flat window surface pulls heat away through convection. These deep wells prevent wind from reaching the glass directly. The window is protected in its own little gap." The men examined, measured, and asked technical questions. Anna answered everything, showing her calculations, sharing Eric's original sketches, explaining the Norwegian stabur designs she'd grown up around. She was generous with her knowledge, never gloating, never mentioning the mockery she'd endured. By February 1st, 17 families had requested detailed plans. Anna provided them freely, even helping sketch modifications for different cabin sizes and configurations. Some families couldn't afford to build complete second walls. Lumber was expensive, labor-intensive. Anna suggested compromise solutions. Build double walls on the north and west faces where wind hit hardest. Add double wall sections around windows. Build smaller air gap barriers in the most vulnerable areas. Every little bit helped. The adoption of Anna's technique spread rapidly through late winter and into spring. By March 1884, 11 families had begun construction on double-wall retrofits or new cabins incorporating air gap design. Henry Walsh built a hybrid design, single walls on the south and east faces, double walls with 18-inch gaps on north and west faces where brutal winds hit. His fuel consumption dropped by 43% compared to the previous winter. Thomas McCarty created an innovative variation combining his stone fireplace with double wall construction, building an inner stone wall behind the fireplace with a 12-inch air gap before the outer log wall. His cabin's efficiency improved by 58%. The Sullivan family built a completely new cabin in summer 1884, incorporating Anna's design from the foundation up. Martha Sullivan added her own innovation: double-layer doors with an air gap between them. Her fuel consumption in winter 1884-1885 was 62% lower than her previous cabin. The economic impact became clear as families calculated their savings. Reducing fuel consumption by 40 to 60% meant reclaiming labor for other productive work. The McCarty family saved approximately 240 hours of woodcutting labor. The Hendricks family saved 180 hours. The Sullivan family saved 200 hours. The community recovered roughly 2,200 hours of productive labor by adopting more efficient heating systems. But the real impact wasn't economic, it was survival. During the winter of 1884-1885, another brutal cold snap hit on January 8th. External temperatures dropped to 36 below zero. This time, families with double-wall construction maintained safe interior temperatures without the desperate conditions of the previous winter. The McCarty family, specifically young Duncan, now 5 years old and fully recovered, rode out the cold snap in a 61-degree cabin, without illness, without suffering. Catherine McCarty later wrote to family in Scotland, "The Norwegian widow's design saved my son's life. Last winter, he nearly died in cold we couldn't fight. This winter, he played by the fire in comfort, while the same cold raged outside." Former skeptics became innovators. John Bergman developed a mathematical formula for calculating optimal air gap width, determining that gaps between 12 and 24 inches provided the best balance. His calculations, shared freely, helped families optimize their designs. Samuel Hendricks created detailed building plans for 3 different air gap cabin designs and distributed them through the trading post. By 1886, 43 cabins in the region incorporated air gap thermal barrier construction. The technique spread beyond Minnesota Territory. Families wrote to relatives in Wisconsin, Dakota Territory, and Montana about the Norwegian widow's heat-saving walls. By 1888, variations of the design appeared in homesteader cabins across the northern plains, each adapted to local materials and conditions. Some used double-sod walls with air gaps. Some used log and board combinations. Some incorporated the principle into barn construction for livestock protection. The core principle, trapped dead air as thermal barrier, remained consistent across all variations. The settlement's official records, preserved in the Dakota Territory archives, contain a remarkable note from February 1885. Samuel Hendricks, serving as settlement recorder, wrote, "The winter of 1883-1884 taught this community a valuable lesson about the difference between tradition and wisdom. We built cabins the way our fathers taught us, assuming experience meant correctness." Anna Bergstrom, drawing on Norwegian building traditions and her late husband's ship carpentry knowledge, demonstrated that different experience sometimes means better solutions. 17 families have adopted air gap thermal barrier construction. Average fuel consumption has decreased 44% compared to the previous winter. No cases of serious cold-related illness have been reported. The settlement acknowledges its initial skepticism was unwarranted and extends its gratitude to Mrs. Bergstrom for her persistence and generosity in sharing knowledge we'd dismissed. Anna Bergstrom died in 1907 at age 66, having raised her 3 children to adulthood in the cabin she and Eric had designed. The structure stood until 1952, when it was dismantled for salvage lumber. 70 years of continuous occupation, serving 3 generations of the Bergstrom family. The logs showed minimal rot, despite predictions they'd fail within 5 years. The air gap design had protected the wood itself, preventing the moisture accumulation that destroyed most frontier structures. Photographs of the cabin, taken in 1948 by a University of Minnesota architectural historian, show the double-wall construction clearly. The images document the 18-inch gaps, the airlock entries, the deep window wells, all exactly as Anna built them in 1883. Those photographs now reside in the university's archives as evidence of frontier thermal engineering that predated modern building science by decades. Modern building science has validated everything Anna understood intuitively. The principle of dead airspace insulation is now fundamental to construction engineering. Contemporary insulated walls function on exactly the same physics Anna employed: trapped air, prevented convection, thermal mass barriers.
The R value of still air is approximately 3.6 per inch of thickness. Anna's 18-inch gap provided roughly R65 insulation, comparable to modern super-insulated construction. Contemporary building codes for Minnesota require minimum R49 insulation in walls for energy efficiency. Anna exceeded modern code requirements in 1883 using only logs, air, and physics she learned from her husband's ship carpentry experience. The National Building Museum in Washington, D.C.
includes Anna's story in its exhibit on vernacular architecture and climate adaptation, noting that immigrant builders often brought sophisticated traditional knowledge that American frontier construction practices had abandoned in favor of speed and simplicity. A replica section of Anna's double-wall design, built to scale, demonstrates the principle for visitors. Energy efficiency researchers have studied historical air gap construction as a low-tech, low-cost alternative for developing regions. A 2018 study by the International Energy Agency analyzed various traditional building techniques and found that double-wall air gap construction achieved 60 to 70% energy savings compared to single-wall structures, confirming precisely what Anna's settlement measured in 1884. The technique has seen revival in modern passive house construction, where eliminating thermal bridges and maximizing dead air spaces are core design principles. Architects designing ultra-efficient buildings for extreme climates have rediscovered what Anna knew. Trapped air is one of nature's finest insulators, and proper air gap design can achieve remarkable thermal performance without complex materials or expensive technology. But perhaps the most significant legacy isn't technical, it's epistemological. Anna's story challenges the assumption that traditional methods are automatically correct simply because they're traditional. The Minnesota frontiersmen who dismissed her design were experienced, competent builders who'd survived brutal conditions for years. They weren't stupid. They weren't lazy. They were trapped by the assumption that their way was the only way, that their experience was complete knowledge. Anna, as an outsider, a widow, an immigrant, a Norwegian drawing on different traditions, could see what established practice missed. Her husband, Eric, drawing on ship carpentry principles, could apply knowledge from one domain to solve problems in another. That cognitive flexibility, that willingness to try something the community considered absurd, saved lives and transformed how an entire region built shelter. The settlement's initial ridicule of Anna's project reveals a pattern that repeats throughout history: established experts dismissing innovation that contradicts their experience, then having to confront empirical evidence that their expertise was incomplete. The settlement's eventual embrace of the technique and their documentation of their own initial error demonstrates the intellectual honesty required to progress beyond tradition. Today, visitors to the Minnesota Historical Society can read Samuel Hendrix's 1885 settlement records, Thomas McCarty's sketches of Anna's wall design, and Martha Sullivan's letters describing the transformation in winter survival. These documents preserve not just a technical innovation, but a community's journey from skepticism to understanding, from tradition-bound thinking to evidence-based adaptation. Anna Bergstrom's cabin isn't just a story about building techniques. It's about the danger of dismissing knowledge that arrives from unexpected sources, the importance of empirical measurement over confident assumption, and the reality that sometimes the person everyone considers foolish is the only one who actually understands the problem. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what other historical building techniques you want me to investigate. Next time, we're diving into the story of a Chinese immigrant in California who built underground cooling systems in 1889 that kept food fresh through brutal summer heat, systems everyone called impossible until the summer of 1891 proved them wrong. The pattern repeats: innovation dismissed, crisis validates, community learns. These forgotten stories of frontier engineering deserve preservation, and your engagement ensures they survive.